Welcome to Art Talk. I'm Laura Womack. Jen McHugh is our technical director,
Hi, everyone.
and Deanna Boucher is our producer. Tonight, we welcome the extremely accomplished Bruce Katsiff. Bruce has a photography exhibition right now at the Michener Art Museum. He's been a photographer for more than 60 years, and his interest in the medium intensified in high school. And ever since then, he has been crafting his ability to photograph subject matter that is challenging and uncomfortable and rejecting the ever-present temptation to make pretty pictures. And when describing his relationship with his art, Katsiff has said that it has served as my personal psychiatrist, a private tool to help me understand and interact with the world. We'll find out about that coming up. But first, you should know about his many, many accomplishments. Katsiff studied photography at Rochester Institute of Technology and Pratt Institute, earning BFA and MFA degrees after graduating from Central High School. He completed postgraduate studies at Oxford University, and his work has been exhibited in museums and galleries, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Delaware Art Museum, and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. He's taught photography and was a college arts administrator. From 1989 to 2012, he served as director CEO of the Michener Art Museum. He also served as a peer accreditation and map reviewer for the American Alliance of Museums and taught in the Graduate Museum of Leadership program at Drexel University. Many more accomplishments. We're very happy to welcome you to Art Talk, Bruce Katsiff.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the kind words.
And welcome to you in the audience. As always, we encourage you to join the conversation by putting your questions in the Q&A. And Jen usually has some relevant links for us in the chat. So we'll see you in the Q&A. And right now, let's jump right into looking at some photographs.
Well,
Okay.
this is an interesting place to begin because this is from a group of pictures that have never been exhibited before in the show at the Michener currently. This is the first time I've ever shown these pictures publicly. And these were an unusual project that I did called collaborative art, where I started with a platinum print photograph of my own and then gave it to a friend who was an artist and said to them, would you react to this thing and add something to it? And then passed it to another friend who also added and changed it. In this case, this image, which is one of mine called Flying Totem, the people who worked on it were a printmaker by the name of Ed Calker and his wife, a painter, Elaine Gowan. They've been old friends. They're both in their 90s now, but they've been involved in the arts their whole life. And this is one of the images where it's a collaborative effort. One of the things that I think is interesting about these pictures is that, most artists work collaboratively. I mean, people who work in theater, musicians, playwrights, people who work in film, all of those artists work collaboratively with others. Visual artists are the rare exception of artists who generally work independently. They generally are not working in a collaborative manner. Sometimes visual artists will have a studio and there'll be lots of people working with them, but that's not collaboration. The people who worked in Andy Warhol's factory were being told what to do by Andy Warhol. This is true collaboration, where the artist gets to respond and interact to the work.
Isn't that a scary thing to put your artwork out there for another artist to mess about with?
Not if you respect the other artist. And no, I don't think it was scary. Actually, this idea really came to me from something that was done in Bucks County by Stone, Evans, and Ramsey in the 1930s, 1940s. They were influenced by what was happening in jazz with improvisation. So they tried bringing artists together, and they collaboratively worked on pieces, the three artists together. And that was really, frankly, the idea that stimulated. I was going to give this a try, but in my case, everybody worked on it independently.
Okay. Let's take a look at another work. Jen?
This is another one of the collaborative works, and this is one that involved Robert Dodge and his wife Gwendolyn. And Robert has done a lot of work with gold foil, so he used gold foil. This is actually the basis of this is from a photograph, the title of which is the title of my exhibition. It's called Pieces of a Life. And these, believe it or not, are all of the bones from one animal, from a German Shepherd, uh, that frankly I disinterred with a friend in order to photograph. And we may see this again in another image, but there was for me a lot of symbolism in this because there is the birth canal that the head is passing through. You have a little trouble seeing the face that's in here, but this is Pieces of a Life, which is also the title of my current exhibition at the Michener.
All right, we're gonna jump to that. Jen's pulling that up. Meanwhile, I remind you to join us in the chat or join us in the Q&A with your questions for Bruce Katsiff. And Bruce, talk to us a little bit about getting started in photography. You were quite young if your interest intensified in high school.
Well, in high school, actually, I started to have an interest in photography. And, it was at a time when most kids, uh, what their dream Christmas present was in the 1960s and the 1970s was an SLR, a single lens reflex camera. Uh, and there's a curator at the Museum of Modern Art John Sarkowski, he used to say in the 60s and 70s that half the students in American colleges are studying photography. There was an enormous explosion of interest in photography in the 60s and 70s. And I was part of that. At Central High School had actually excellent artistic traditions because there were some really significant artists who were graduates of Central High School, like Thomas Akins was a Central grad, or you think of Alfred Barnes from the Barnes Foundation. Barnes was a Central grad, and one of his classmates was William Glackens, the member of the Seven. Glackens is one of the people who basically advised Barnes in the purchases. So that was an influence. When I got out of high school, uh, I I went to law, I went to a pre-law program because my parents very much wanted their three kids to graduate from college. Neither of my parents were college grads. So I went to Penn State as a pre-law student. I spent a year and I said, that's not what I want to do. I want to study photography. And in the early 60s, there were very few places where you could study photography. And one choice was Rochester Institute of Technology. Rochester was in Kodak, was in Kodak. Rochester Institute was in Rochester, and Kodak was there. And we used to refer to Kodak as the Great Yellow Father, okay? And Kodak's influence had Rochester build a significant program. When I made that decision, my parents were not pleased. Okay, they didn't think it was necessary to go to college to study photography. So uh, they were terrific people. I don't hold that against them. Fortunately, I got married at an early age, and my wife didn't object, and she's the one who helped pay for my ability to go to college and study photo at RIT. One of the important things, and it was really mainly a bit of luck, when my senior thesis project was up at RIT, at the end in the fourth year, you had a senior thesis project. A curator from the Museum of Modern Art happened to be visiting RIT. That curator went through my exhibition and picked some of my pictures to include in a show at the Museum of Modern Art. I was 21 years old, okay? This was a very profound impact. It didn't happen because I was a great artist. It happened mainly because of luck. So that really helped to build the confidence that let me move forward with the idea that I was going to spend my time making pictures. This the image is up now. This is the pieces of life image, and as I say, many of my photographs, these are difficult subject matter. They're often subject matter that we're told to avoid. But these are all the bones of a German shepherd. And the figure on the left-hand side, represents the kind of face that's overlooking the scene. There is the birth canal. If you look very carefully in the box, you'll see that there is a metal plate on one of the bones because the dog had broken a leg and the vets had installed a metal plate. It's in that square box on the left-hand side. There is very often uh, a lot of narrative underneath my pictures. I'm not sure that it's ever communicated, but I'm concerned about the rituals of life at the bottom, and I'm concerned about the uncertainty and the chance of life in the bones that are hanging from the top loosely. But this is a good example, and this is from a series called Mort Naturelle, which is the French word for still life. And I worked pretty much as what I would call a directorial photographer, which means that I would build and construct the things that I photographed. So this is very much like a painter doing a still life. The painter brings into the studio the objects, creates the still life, and sits there and paints it. In my case, I brought the objects into my studio and photographed them instead. And these pictures were actually done in my mid 30s and 40s, and they were done at a time when I was thinking about my own mortality and trying to understand and deal with those kinds of issues.
Well, I was just going to ask you, what about this subject matter was so interesting to you? I mean, it is a risky subject matter for a young photographer, because it is challenging to look at, right?
Yeah. Well, one of my beliefs is that artists want a reaction to their work, okay? And that reaction can be positive or that reaction can be negative. But that either reaction is much better than people being bored by what you do. Uh,
Yeah.
and and there are people who are turned off by my pictures, but there are a few people who are bored by them. Uh, and I've always been interested in finding interesting subject matter in things that we're taught to avoid or that we're taught are ugly. So a lot of my pictures are challenging. And as I said, I'm not a pretty picture maker. I don't do sunsets, I don't do snow scenes. And I don't mean to put those down. That's fine. If that's the kind of work you want to do, it's fine. It's not the work that interests me.
Okay, we have a question. Jen, can you help us out with that?
Sure. This question, one of the viewer wants to know, can you expand on your collaborative work? Do you bring the idea and get input? What is your process? What is the most seductive? And what is the best outcome to you and to your art in working this way?
Well, it's a pretty unstructured thing. I don't tell them what to do. I just, in this case, I brought them a print of the image that's on the screen on the right-hand side, the black and white image, and I gave it to them and gave them no instruction. They may have known a little bit about how I had taken the picture, but it was a free hand for them to respond in any way they wanted to. So no instruction given. It's totally up to the individual artist. And as I said, in almost every case, there were multiple artists. Robert Dodge is a friend that I have known for actually for almost half a century. Robert and I have been friends for over 50 years. So I've watched his work. I have great respect for his work. And I never had any doubt that he would do something interesting. And his partner, Gwen, is similarly an interesting artist. So I didn't really structure it. It was just really, frankly, a curiosity. I have about 20 of these things. As I say, I've never exhibited them before. I've always kind of kept them in a drawer. And we decided to, this is another one. In this case, the collaborating artist, I believe, is Ricardo Vieira. Ricardo Vieira was the head of the museum at Lehigh University, a Cuban, and Ricardo is the one who added all of the color to this of my. The, the subject's called, this is called the Trinity, these three birds, and Ricardo is the one who added the various elements to it.
Did you ever have an emotional reaction to what your collaborators do to your work? I mean, most of us are invested in our creative efforts emotionally, and then to see what somebody else does to it, I would think that could be hard or exciting.
Exciting for me more than anything else. I was never troubled. I mean, there are some of them that I like more than others, uh, but I was never troubled. This is another one by Ricardo. Actually, Ricardo is the gentleman on the top next to between the skull and the mouse skeleton. That's Ricardo. No, as I said, some I liked more than others, but it never scared me, and I wasn't really precious. Remember, one of the things about photography is that it's a medium that makes multiples. So it's not as if I'm giving them a one of a kind that I can't produce again. This is, I've made multiple prints. It's one of the basic elements of photography, past the daguerreotype. You know, the first photo, the photography is interesting because cameras existed before there were photographs. Cameras go back to the Renaissance. And artists used the camera obscura, and what they would do is they had a lens that projected an image on a ground glass. They'd take a piece of tracing paper, place it on the ground glass, and they'd use it to study perspective, or to do an outline. It wasn't until the 1830s that the idea of film developed and a practical process developed. And one of the first processes was the daguerreotype, and they were one of a kind. There was only one image. There was no negative. It wasn't until the English inventor Henry Fox Talbot came up with the negative positive process. This is another one. The collaborating artist in this case is Paul Shamley. Paul is a terrific artist, and I was always astounded by this because these black lines that she entered into this image, I thought were just so wonderfully effective and made it so much more mysterious and created this kind of visual barrier that protected you from getting too close to the image. Uh, I might add the brush marks around the outside edge are because these are platinum prints. And one of the things about platinum prints is that you take a piece of paper and you basically paint on the light sensitive emulsion, which is a platinum salt. So I've decided to let you see the brush marks from these platinum prints.
Which is wonderful. And I think it's also interesting, Paula Shamley, I know her work. She's also a very accomplished photographer from Upper Bucks County.
Exactly. Yes.
And it's interesting to me that she put these very abstracting marks on your photograph.
Yeah, yeah, no, indeed. It's really more. You wouldn't look at this and know that she's principally a photographer, uh, but
Right.
no. And listen, as far as I'm concerned, I, the creative energy of these things is amplified because it's not just my creative energy; it's also the creative energy of my collaborating artists. So I enjoyed this. It was a fun experiment, and it was really done entirely as an experiment. Uh, Needless to say, I have a lot of artist friends. I've been plowing these fields for decades, so I have a lot of artist friends, and I never knew what the outcome was going to be, but the outcome was interesting. And for this retrospective, when we went back and were looking at stuff, we decided, you know what, these are really interesting. You know, the show at the Michener, I've used the line, people have heard me say this, one of the really nice things about the show at the Michener is it's really great to have a retrospective while you're still alive. Okay. Because all too often retrospectives happen after you're dead. So to have one while you're alive is a pure joy. And there was a guest curator, a young PhD scholar from Delaware, Delaware Art Museum, who served as the guest curator for this show. So she's the one, together with me, who helped us select the work. And the show includes kind of 5 bodies of work. I've tended to work in kind of 10-year cycles. So the Mort Natural pictures were done over a 10 or 12-year period between the age of maybe 35 till my late 40s when I was exploring that piece. But I have a variety. We'll see some other examples of things that I've done.
Well, shall we go back and look more at the Mort Natural, and then we can go from there?
Sure, we can. This image, one of the things, just again from a technical perspective, one of the things about these platinum prints is that you can't make an enlargement. They have to be a contact print. So you have to have the negative the same size of the final picture. Uh, and I was interested in making larger prints. So I actually built a 20 by 24-inch camera, a very large camera that took a piece of film that was 20 by 24 inches wide. So this print is actually that size. And this is really a takeoff. I mean, the title is The Cabinet of Dr. Photo, and it's a takeoff from the surrealist film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is, was a really important film in the surrealist area. And there are all of these, it's actually a type box where there are all these found objects. I will say that one of the things I never used was human bones. Okay. And I never included, I think there's only one example where I included a human skull. That was just a place that I didn't want to go for some reason. So these are all animal skulls. And very often these are things that people would bring to me. For example, in the center of this picture is that form with a tail. It's actually a mouse. And someone found this in when they were doing some construction work. They found it, so they put it in the box and they gave it to me, wrapped in a ribbon. Here, Bruce, here's a present that only you would appreciate. You know,
And what else to do with it? They have, sorry to interrupt you, they have a almost a Victorian feel to them with the, as they were collecting, particularly natural species and the display of collection. And then also with the technique that you're using, this platinum print. Any thoughts on that, Bruce? Intentional or?
Oh, absolutely. One of the great influences, Charles Wilson Peale, and that wonderful painting that's at PAFA, The Artist in His Museum, where Charles Wilson Peale pulls back the curtain, and behind him are the bones of the mastodon and the other objects from Peale's museum. And that's very much an influence, very much exactly what I'm thinking about. In this case, this is not the artist pulling back the curtain, but actually, one of the things I was delighted. I did have a show at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and I was always thrilled with the idea that my pictures were hanging in the same building as the artist in his studio, the Charles Wilson Peale picture. Incidentally, there is, if you haven't had a chance yet, the current exhibition at PAFA, which is a joint project with the Philadelphia Museum of Art, is really a kind of history of historic images from PAFA, plus a lot of contemporary stuff. It's well worth the trip because there are so many great paintings. I mean, Death on a Pale Horse, The Artist in His Studio, The Gross Clinic, the wonderful Thomas Eakins painting. Plus, mixed in with that is a lot of contemporary work. So it's not just historic paintings, but it's also contemporary stuff. But, one of the great things about PAFA, about the Pennsylvania Academy, is they got the pictures. I mean, they've really got the pictures. So
Very generous. Okay, well, let's look at some more great pictures that we've got right here tonight. Um, and
oh,
there we
there we
go.
are. There I there I am in the studio with my 20 by 24 camera. So you can see it was a large and again, the only reason was because I wanted to make large platinum prints and they had to be a contact print. I'll add, in today's world, I no longer have to do that. You can actually make a large negative digitally. You can actually use a archival pigment printer or a digital printer and print on a piece of acetate to make a large negative. But when I was doing these things in the 70s and 80s, you had to have a large negative. And you see me set up here. This was in one of my studios, and it was great because I'd photograph the negative, go into the darkroom, process the negative, make sure it was exactly the way I wanted it, and then I'd destroy the setup. Very often I'd wait days until the light was just right. So again, as I said, this is very much working as a still life painter would have worked, in the 15th century or 16th century.
No, we see your subject matter behind you. Let's look at a couple of more of these. Jen, if either flying totem or helix is next.
Either one, flying totem or helix. If you've got helix, we can talk about that.
Yeah. So what is it like as that's coming up, Bruce, to be exhibiting? We'll save that question. Let's talk about helix.
So this is a painting where I was really intrigued by this whole notion of the helix. You see it in the growth of the sunflower. You see it in the ram's horns, the same helix shape. You see it in the cow's skull. And of course, the double helix is the basis of DNA. So, it's the helix is an essential element of our lives, and it's an essential element of life itself. So this photograph was really an effort to try to put together finding that helix shape in a variety of different natural objects. I've always enjoyed this photograph, and this is my 12 by 20 camera, which I've turned on the side to make these images going in the other direction, as a vertical image instead of a horizontal.
I think here you've got really that almost like the painterly quality of the sunflower seeds, the curves of the horns. It really it does go that extra mile compositionally.
Yeah, no, I'm this for me is a satisfying picture, and I don't find this such a difficult subject. I use the line that my subjects aren't born until the death of their host. So, underneath our bodies are all this stuff that we never see, but it's exquisite. I mean, can you imagine trying to make that skull? I mean, can you imagine trying to craft it? What materials would you use? I mean, it's a remarkable object, and it exists during the life of the animal as totally unseen. So that's part of what I'm doing, is looking underneath the surface, and really, I don't want to belabor the point, but these are not pictures you make in your 20s. These are pictures when you're, I think, thinking more about life and death and the meaning of life and some broader questions. I don't have any answers. I'm just amazed by these hidden elements of life.
Right. Let's go now to the portraits you did of the river townspeople
Okay.
and local portraits as we're getting set up for that. Tell us about that series,
This
Bruce.
is this is actually the earliest body of work. It's a body of work that started when I was a graduate student at Pratt. My wife and I and our small child, we were all city kids, but we moved to the country, and we moved into this little village in Bucks County called Lumberville, along the Delaware River. And I started photographing my neighbors. Now, I was working with a view camera, which meant that the camera was on a tripod, and it was a view camera where you had a dark cloth that you had to go under the dark cloth to look at the image projected on the ground glass. And of course, the image that you see on the ground glass is upside down and backwards because the lens has bent the light and reversed the image. So I was working with that, and I was basically photographing neighbors, and it gave me a chance to get to know them. And these were also very directorial because I'm deciding where they should be. This happens to be Frank Filer, who is the best gardener in our community. He is a guy who grew up in the Lumberville area. I remember Frank used to laugh at me because when we moved to the country, I wanted to do a garden. So I went to the library and I got out a book on gardening, and that was the basis upon which I was going to start my gardening. When Frank heard about that, he laughed. He thought the idea that you go to the library and get a book, that's not how you learn about gardening. You know? But this is a photograph of Frank. And that collection, which is called Rivertown Portraits, there is a publication of that. I might add, okay, here we have, this is the general store in Lumberville. And this is Gerald Gordon, who was the proprietor of the general store. And the general store was the center of community life in Lumberville. The post office was there. You'd stop there in the morning to pick up your mail. You'd get a quart of milk. And to be honest, Gerald was also the local drug dealer. So this was a time when marijuana was illegal. So he wasn't selling heroin or crack, but he was selling marijuana. So it was a one-stop operation. And Gerald was a terrific guy, and it was really the center of life in this little village called Lumberville. And it said the book is called Rivertown Portraits.
Oh, I think that the general store is still thriving.
It
It
is.
looks a little different. I
Yes.
assume Gerald's moved on.
Yeah, actually, Gerald's no longer with us
Oh,
because the truth is, I would not tell that story. I
ah,
wouldn't tell you the details of that story if Gerald were still alive. But Gerald is no longer with us. But he was. Oh, this is another local neighbor. This is Barbara Tinsman, and her little friend, uh, her pet. Uh, and this is a series of photographs. As I said, it started when I was a graduate student at Pratt, and then went for about 10 years. I was photographing these people, and it culminated with an exhibition at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts of this collection. And these are very much traditional photographs. I mean, these are black and white, gelatin silver prints, although the prints that are in the show at Michener, there's about 15 of these. The prints that are in the show well, 15. I mean, I did hundreds and hundreds of photographs. I probably photographed 100 people. And, maybe there are 40 prints that I think are interesting. This is Pete Tinsman, another local, next to his big truck, because he was a stonemason. He used to move around, heavy stones. This is Pete Tinsman. And this is another neighbor. This is Kevin, he taught graphic design at Pratt in the graduate student, but he also did painting on the side. This is one of his paintings, and his wife. They lived in Point Pleasant. Ken Bergman was his name.
I think this is just such a magnificent portrait with the two of them looking very, respectable, and she's in her suit, and
And
he's very,
there's the nude up top. I mean, it's
uh,
it's the painting. It's the painting that makes this. And
yeah.
and while this is subject, I am very directorial again here because I've selected where they're sitting. I've selected where I'm photographing. The camera's on a tripod. This is not this is not window to nature photography. I'm not catching something out of the corner of my eye or catching something as it goes. I'm really controlling these things. And also, one of the elements of a view camera is that you can control the way the camera sees perspective. Uh, and for example, you can photograph a tall building and eliminate the perspective by adjusting the film plane so that the film plane is parallel to your subject matter. So there's a lot of control that you have in a view camera.
Interesting. I think the lighting in this one is interesting as well. There's sort of the light coming in through the window, but her face, even though the light is apparently behind her, is really nicely lit. He recedes to the background, but you still see him, and then, it's much softer on that nude. So is there a lot of thought going into it? There must be
Sure,
into
but
the
this is
light.
all available light. I wasn't carrying a light pack with me. This is available light. Making use of the light. I mean, he's kind of lurking in the background. He's kind of hidden back there. Uh, uh, And the camera's on a tripod. Sometimes these may be long exposures. They may be a half-second exposure, or a quarter-second exposure, something like that, which is very much doable with a view camera and
Okay.
a tripod.
Let's see a couple more. Yeah.
Ah, yeah, this is great. Actually, this photograph's in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. This is the Zigsteds. This is Val Zigsted and his wife May. And one of the things I did with his photographs, I asked Val to empty his pockets. And lo and behold, what does he pull out but bullets? They're in his pocket. He puts them on the table. And Val was an interesting guy. He was a stained glass artist. His studio was a geodesic dome, and his wife May was also pretty fabulous. But I've always been very fond of this. And again, this is a view camera picture where I've adjusted the camera to exaggerate the positioning of the table, so that you almost looks like you're looking down on it while you're looking across at them.
Right. And I kind of like this has the opposite effect. The last picture had a lot of complexity to it. This one's very simple, even though there's a lot going on the table. And there's just the way they're looking at the camera is I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but there's a
A little
lot of
suspicious.
yeah, there's there's a guardedness there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've looked at this really beautiful series of classic black and white portraits, and now for something completely different, we're going to go to the face maps.
Okay.
Uh, you have a lot of styles happening, Bruce. I mean, okay, 60. Did I say 60? That seems like a lot of years to be doing photography. Um, how do you move from what causes the shift?
Listen, there are some artists who find their voice and pursue that single voice for their whole life. Think about Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams is making the same pictures when he's 70, or similar pictures when he's 70, that he made when he's 30, okay? Because he's found his voice, and that's the chord he's going to play. And that's fine and dandy. There are other artists who have moved around from different places. One example, obviously, would be Picasso. You think of his blue period versus his cubist period versus his. I'm in the camp of somebody who's moved around. I mean, it's not short term. I mean, each of these represents at least 10 years of work. In some cases, it may even be 15 years. But over 60 years of making photographs, it's pretty easy to spend 10 years on one subject and then moving to another. And I don't think there's any conscious decision. Suddenly you start to explore some idea and you say, this is interesting. I think one of the things that's important for any artist is that you have to explore an idea in some depth, okay? You can't just make two or three pictures and say, I got a whole new thing. Make two, after you've made 150 pictures, maybe then we can talk about, have you really started to explore this? Uh, Not to suggest that quantity is the issue, but it's all a question of trying to pursue an idea and see how far you can develop it. So in the next group, I think you're going to bring up the face maps.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are now in these pictures, I've moved from the 19th century to the 21st century because we're moving from traditional analog negative positive photography to digital photography. Okay. So these are all digital pictures that I have manipulated in Photoshop to organize them. And these pictures were really the whole idea of this was one of the things I love about photography is the incredible amount of detail that you get. You get so much information. And I was just thrilled with the notion of how much detail there is as you see the hairs and you see the skin and you see the pimples. And I would basically take maybe 50 close-up photographs all around the person's face and then flatten them out so that they became a single plane. Not unlike what the Greeks did in their sculpture when they tried to show both a side view and a front view at the same time. This happens to be Brian Peterson, a good friend. He was my chief curator at the Michener. Uh, and this is a digital picture. This is an archival pigment print, which means it's a digital print done with a digital camera, small, full frame Nikon, something like that, and then manipulated in Photoshop to organize and put together the pictures. So, I mean, one of the things Dorothy Fisher, who wrote the essay for the catalog for the current show, talks about what she calls the materiality of my photographs. I've always been interested. For me, a photograph really is a physical object, and the truth is that the only way we could see photographs for a very long time was as physical objects. It had to be printed on paper. That's completely changed. Okay. In the current world, 99.9% of the photographs that are made never exist as physical objects. They're on your cell phone, right? And you only see them as a fleeting image on a screen. Okay. And the number of photographs that are actually made as physical objects today is minuscule. But 50 years ago, that was the only way you could see a photograph. Okay. That was the whole idea of what happened as photography moved from the camera obscura to photography. I mean, in essence, the camera obscura was like this. The photograph on the camera obscura didn't exist. It only existed when it was in front of you and it was being projected on the ground glass. So that's one of the things about my work, is that it represents that period when photography is about a physical object, which it isn't about today. Much of it isn't about.
Right. Let's let's see another one, Jen. These are
This is my granddaughter. And I should tell you, she hates this photograph. It's not in the show at the Michener because I know how much she hates the photograph. Actually, I'll tell you a funny story about this. This is my granddaughter, she's now 26, 27, in her last year of law school. Uh, this photograph was purchased by the Lehigh University Art Museum. And I came home one day when my granddaughter was about 15, and I said to her, "Well, Emily, now you're in a museum." And she broke down in tears. She was so upset.
Oh
she,
no.
she really doesn't like this photograph. As I said, I didn't include it in the exhibit at Michener because I know how much she doesn't like it. Maybe if I'm lucky, by the time she's 50, maybe she'll look back on it and like it then. Uh, and I accept that. You know, I'm interested in looking at people, and I'm not trying to flatter them. You know, when you go into the portrait photographer, in most cases, you look in the window and you see the pictures that the portrait photographer has made, and you're going in to say to that portrait photographer, "I want you to make me so I look like those people in the window that I saw." Okay, and that's never been my interest. I'm interested. I have my own interests, and I. This is another. This is the former director of the Erie Art Museum, John Vanko. And again, you can see how I'm flattening out the image so that you've got this side view that's part of the front view, and the glasses, of course, are as I'm looking. But again, what fascinates me is it's the detail. I mean, I'd love to be able to take a magnifying glass and go up to my friends and inspect their face, but you can't do that. But when I did these photographs, I was able to do that. And
So
I call these things face maps. Some of these are very large. I mean, they're 40 by 40, so they're big prints.
so they're really powerful, Bruce. I think obviously you're putting together a number of different photographs because there's no way in one photograph you would get those angles on his two ears. So that's
Yeah.
one thing. Yeah, if you want to comment.
No, 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 no. You're
Okay.
absolutely right. Yeah.
And but also I think it's interesting the way you're layering them. It's almost like piecework and quilts, to use a textile metaphor. But and there's also like the composition of what size excerpt you're taking, what size pieces of photographs you're using to create his hair, I think you're making some interesting patterns there. And I don't know if that's conscious. You're clearly extremely well educated about art and composition. How much of that do you think about when you're creating these face maps?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's very much a part of it. And again, a large piece of the one of the things that has always fascinated me about photography is the amount of information, the detail that you see in the photograph. Our eyes have the largest connection to our brain. Okay, the optic nerve is the amount of information we get through our eyes is just enormous. And the photograph, after all, the photograph is very much like our eye. Our eye has a lens. Okay, it's got a cornea and a lens, and the image is projected on our retina the same way it's projected in a camera. The image that's projected on our retina is projected upside down and reversed. Okay, and our brain then gets electrical impulses that come from the retina to the brain in order for us to see things. But our cameras work, they're modeled after our eyes. And the amount of information for me is just always astounding.
Ah, interesting. So, these are now at the Michener.
Yeah,
Here we go. Then,
this is Nelson Shanks, great painter. Nelson's no longer with us. Nelson, portrait painter, most famous for the portrait of Princess Diana that he did, but he was really a Renaissance portrait painter. He worked in a studio he only painted under natural light. Okay, of course, only painted in oil. He never used acrylic. I mean, he was really a Renaissance portrait painter. Uh, and it's just a photograph of Nelson. I don't know if he ever saw this image. Actually, for the Michener, what we did was we took only portraits of artist friends. So none of my family members or other people that I did these face maps of. And again, this face mask happened after the Mort Naturel things. So I think I started these things when I was probably around 50, maybe my late 40s, early 50s, and did them up until maybe 10 years ago. So there was probably, a good 15, 20 years where I was making these face maps. I have a lot of these. Oh, this is another great artist friend. This is Peter Payon. Actually, Peter had the show at the Michener in the gallery before me. And Peter's a terrific painter. Peter loves this picture. He's one of the few people who actually likes their face map picture. Actually, Peter traded me a print for a print of this. But I love the glasses, the way they come together
yes.
from either side. But this is Peter Payon, and this print is in the Michener.
And this one, as you say, with the glasses, it's just sort of coming in at his face, which is
Yeah.
small in the middle. I think we've got one more of these, and there
Oh,
we go.
okay. This is Val Ziegstedt. Val is a stained glass artist. His father was a Swedenborgian who had worked at Brynathan Cathedral. And Val was the guy who took the bullets out with his wife May. Val had a studio that was a geodesic dome. And this again, portrait of Val. In this case, this is really strongly that Egyptian thing because you get that side view and front view mixed together. Uh, but again, it's just you know, for me, it was a great joy to go from black and white to suddenly working in color. Uh, and again, this is very much digital stuff because it's digital camera. It's all Photoshop. Listen, I loved working in the dark room. I loved rocking trays and doing all that stuff, but I also love doing the digital work. So I'm fortunate that I've been able to, as I said, I have one foot in the 19th century, one foot in the 21st century. I've really worked with photography on both ends. One of the things about me is I have a lot of photography friends who don't call themselves photographers. They call themselves artists. Okay. I don't call myself an artist. I'm a photographer. Okay. I make pictures with cameras. I'm a photographer, okay? Am I a fine arts photographer? Maybe I am, but I've never felt the need to call myself an artist. I'm happy to call myself a photographer. As I say, I have a lot of artists. It's interesting though, the
Well, let
photographers,
me Yeah,
the photog
I just want to say quickly on the face maps, Jen informs me that Mark Safiri also does like his face map. That's
yes,
at the Mitchner. Mark Safiri is a sculptor, of course. We've had him on our show. And Nelson Shank's son is also a marvelous portraitist, and we've had him on our show as well. Those are in the archives, as you will be as well, Bruce. We're so excited about that. But
oh, great.
please,
I didn't know that
the,
there was that Nelson had a son and he's a painter. Is he
yeah,
is he
we'll
does
send
he
you a
teach
link, won't we?
does he teach at Studio in Caminate?
Yes, he does.
Ah,
Yes, he
okay.
does. And we used to see him, Alexander Shanks, we used to see him at the mill shows, but he's moved closer to Philadelphia and he's out of our radius, unfortunately. But he's a marvelous, very impressive painter as well. So I recommend him to you. It's
Great.
wonderful to be in a position to recommend an artist to you, Bruce. Um, but actually, you're talking about art as artist, photographer, that dichotomy, and I really work hard not to ask photographers about the whole is photography art thing, but because you have this longevity in the realm and therefore a longitudinal view, if I may say, and also as the director of a museum and someone who teaches, you know, is this just, should we just cast aside this question as ridiculous or, is there a history to that? Can you help us with any insight on that question?
It was a burning question in 1920. I don't think it's a burning question today. Okay, there was a whole period when the question was, is photography an art form? And one of the efforts was in the 19th century when the Royal Photographic Society, when the Queen bought a photograph for her art collection. That was kind of a significant moment in the history of photography. But in the 1920s, that was a big debate. Is photography an art? Isn't photography an art? Frankly, it hasn't really interested me. My view is artists have always used the medium of their time. Okay, when when paint, instead of being mixed in egg tempera, was oil was the medium to put pigment in. Artists switched from egg tempera to oil painting. Okay, when bronze suddenly appeared as a casting material, artists started casting in bronze. Okay, when computers happened, artists adopted computers. So artists will always use the technology of their time to make their art. And as far as I'm concerned, uh, I yes, it's an art form. You have individuals who are expressing themselves. I mean, can it be not artful? Of course, but there are plenty of paintings that aren't terribly artful. you know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it,
So we're going to
it's
banish that question. We won't ask it ever again.
okay.
You've solved it for us. I do want to get your perspective as a former director for so many years and so successful at the Mitchner, and we really thank you for what you've done to help us have this marvelous gem of a museum in our community. I mean, we're so fortunate. What is it like now as an artist, as a photographer, to be on display on the walls? And was it challenging working with a curator, from a different perspective?
Well, it's a real joy. Listen, I've had I've had my share of museum exhibitions. Okay, I mean, I've exhibited at PAF. I mean, I've had one-person shows at PAF, at the Delaware Art Museum, at the Erie Art Museum. This one is really special for me because it's at the Mitchner, and obviously, I spent many years. And the idea of an artist running a museum, that's nothing new. That used to be the common device. The first museum in America was created by Charles Wilson Peale, the Pennsylvania Academy. You know, Thomas Akins was the director of PAFA. So there's plenty of history. In today's world, not so much so. It's mainly art historians who run museums. But listen, at the Mitchner, I always got much more than I gave, but it was a terrific opportunity and a great experience, and to be involved in creating an institution. You know, working at the Michener, what was a daunting challenge, because basically what we said we were going to do is that we were going to create a credible museum in Bucks County in keeping with Bucks County's artistic heritage. That was a daunting challenge in this community. This is a region rich with world-class museums. And the idea that we were going to start a new museum that was going to be credible was really a significant challenge. And, you know, obviously one of the big helps was Michener's name. The Michener didn't start because Michener gave us a big check. Eventually, he did write some big checks, but he wanted to know that the community was behind us before he stepped in to support us. But one of the things I've said is, do you think the Michener would have made so much progress if it was called the Pine Street Museum? I don't think so. Okay? I really don't think so. I think Michener's name and his history. Jim was somebody who taught America about racial and ethnic diversity at a time when America wasn't much interested in the subject. South Pacific was banned in South Africa because it had interracial marriage in it. Jim used to talk about the fact that his marriage to Maury was illegal in 30 states because there were anti-misogyny laws in the 1950s in America against interracial marriage. So Jim was an honorable guy. I mean, he was on the NASA Advisory Committee. That was the committee that NASA organized for people to advise them on space, along with Walter Cronkite. He was on that. Michener was on the Stamp Committee, which is the committee that decides who gets placed on U.S. stamps. He was really quite a remarkable guy, and he did wonders. The one thing we didn't get from Jim was any of his collections, because Jim was a collector. But by the time we got to him, he had already given away his ukiyo-e prints collection to the Honolulu Academy of Art, and he had given away his American painting collection to the University of Texas. So there was no collection that we could get for Jim. It was only his name. And there are hundreds of people who had their shoulders to the wheel in order to build the museum. Let me say one thing about museums that I think is so important. Museums in America are principally supported by their communities, okay? Museums in America get very little federal support. On average, museums maybe get 10 or 15% of their budget comes from federal support. And what we're learning today is it's a good thing that it's that way. Because you look at what's happening at the Smithsonian, which is a federal institution, and the kinds of problems that are happening in this conflict between government and the institutions, and government's effort to try to control what happens at the institutions. We have independence in American museums because they are principally community-supported institutions. And the last comment I make about that is this thing that I've always said there were three elements that really contributed enormously to the cultural quality of this region. The first was the physical beauty of the area. It's gorgeous around here, and Bucks County is really attractive. The second element was the proximity to urban centers. So the closeness to New York and Philadelphia was very important, and many artists who lived in Bucks County worked in New York and Philadelphia. But the third, and maybe one of the most important qualities, was the heritage of Quaker values, okay? The ability to accept people of diverse backgrounds. You put those three things together, and that's, I believe, one of the reasons why there's such a rich artistic heritage in and around Bucks County. And the Michener's goal and purpose really was to advance that heritage. And I must say, I think that we've succeeded, and it's a big we, because it is hundreds of people, thousands of people who've been involved in building the museum. I had the great fortune of working there. I often use the joke that I describe the job of being a director of an art museum is that you get to play Robin Hood, okay? My job was redistribution of wealth. okay? And museums are the place where the 1%ers get to share with the rest of us. So, you know, it was just, what greater reward could I ask than having worked at the Michener, and now I'm out of there for 16, 17 years, well, not that, 14, 15 years, and the place is still thriving. I would add one last comment about that, and that is, I never showed my own work when I was the director, okay? There was an absolute iron wall behind that, okay? I had my own work and I did it. I never believed it was appropriate for me as director to in any way use the Michener to advance my career as an artist. So this project's happened. I've been out of the museum for 14 years, and I didn't organize the exhibit, okay? I didn't see the show until the day it opened, okay? I handed it to them. They put it together. Josh, who is the exhibit designer, he designed the exhibit. The guest curator wrote all the didactics. They're my pictures, but it's the museum's exhibition. Okay, so I had no trouble stepping back. It was not my goal to be in charge. My only request was I wanted the pictures grouped together. Other than that, I was hands off.
Well, it's a beautiful exhibition. Congratulations on that and all of your other accomplishments. We're so glad that you came here tonight to share it with us, Bruce Katsiff. Congratulations on your show and thank you again.
Well, thank you very much. And, the work that all you do, you look at the history of the mill and its contributions to the artistic traditions of this region, and they're incredibly rich. And I appreciate all of your time and your efforts to put all together, do your homework. And my pleasure. Listen, I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky, and I've had, a great opportunity, and I'm very pleased to say the least.
Very good. Thank you again. Art Talk is taking a break in May, so we appreciate all of you who came tonight. Check back for future shows. Jen McHugh is our technical director.
Good night, everyone.
Deanna Botcher is our producer. I'm Laura Womack. Thank you again.